So Rosh Chodesh Iyar is today and tomorrow. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. As many of you probably know, either from last session or just because you know, Rosh Chodesh is the beginning of the Hebrew month. So it's like a minor holiday that's very special for women. So let's talk a little bit about what happens in Iyar according to the Torah. So Nisan was last month, the month of Pesach, is considered the first month of the year. By some sources, it's a little complicated, but we consider Nisan the first month. So Iyar is technically the second month. In Nisan, we became free. We left slavery in Egypt. We crossed the sea. We experienced the Exodus. In Iyar, we're beginning our journey through the desert. We're just starting this journey. We're encountering a few hiccups here and there. We're kind of just getting used to the idea of God, of rules, and we're struggling, though, some of us, with the idea of having faith that God is going to provide for us because we're in the middle of the wilderness. So on the very first Rosh Chodesh Iyar, according to sources, the Israelites have been wandering the desert for 3 days without water. I'm just going to read to you a little bit from a few psukim from the book of Exodus, and then we'll talk about the meaning of Iyar. So when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he cast it into the waters, and the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he tested them. He said, "If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his eyes, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases upon thee, which I have put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that heals thee." So what happens in this little episode? The people complain, as they do. Moshe prays to God. God shows Moshe a tree, or maybe like a branch. Moshe throws the branch into the water becomes sweet and drinkable. And Hashem uses this as a lesson for the Israelites. He says, if you obey me, if you follow my commandments, I, your God, will keep you healthy. And in that very last sentence is actually the source of the word Iyar and the meaning of this month. So God says in Hebrew, Ani Hashem Rofecha, I am God, your healer. These 3 words, the first letters of these 3 words, actually form an acronym that spell the word Iyar. Ani Hashem Rofecha, Aleph Yod Resh, Iyar. So we learn from this that the essence of the month of Iyar is actually healing. Iyar is an auspicious time for healing, both physically and spiritually, and I think we can all agree that this is very relevant for this time. Healing can have a lot of meanings. Most years when we're not experiencing a global pandemic, it means personal, spiritual, individual self-healing, a time of introspection and reflection, which is also a theme of Iyar. Thinking and ruminating is like the main sense of the month of Iyar that's associated with this month. So a lot of people interpret this to mean that Iyar is an amazing time to look inside, to sit back, to think about where you are, where you want to be, and do some spiritual work on yourself. Spiritual, emotional, intellectual healing, which I think is something that we all have a bit of time to do these days, more than usual. And of course, which I think is very relevant right now, healing can also mean literal physical healing from illness or sickness or injury. And I think the world is very much in need of this. And actually, when I was preparing for this session, I was really struck by how many of the themes of Iyar dovetail really neatly, I guess, with what we're going through today. And you'll see as we go through a few more of these ideas and concepts that the month of Iyar and what it represents really relates in a lot of amazing ways to coronavirus, to self-isolation, to kind of like this in-between time that we're all in, where we're really not certain about what the future holds. There's like a lot of amazing parallels that we're going to learn about. And I think that Iyar comes to teach us that while yes, we are in a very difficult moment, it's actually all part of this process of healing, which can be very painful because after all, like it is a process, it's a transition. You are no longer sick, but you're not yet well. So I think this is kind of exactly where we are in the world right now. A lot of countries are, thank God, over the worst of the outbreak, but are still kind of dealing with the fallout. And we're wondering now what the next steps are, how we move forward, how we return to the world as it was in a safe and healthy way. And I think that this kind of confusing transition time is really relevant to Iyar. Like, let's look at Iyar in the larger view of the Hebrew calendar and the Jewish year, and we'll see that it's really like in its core a period of transition. Okay. So Iyar comes between Nisan, which is the month of Passover, and Sivan, which is the month of Shavuot. And Passover, of course, marks the time of the Exodus, and Shavuot marks the Israelites receiving the Torah at Sinai. So in between, they have this 7-week period of slow growth, of development, of moving away from slavery towards Torah. We're moving from two very different extremes. It's a period where we're very aware of time, which brings us to one of the most, I think, relevant aspects of Iyar, which is counting the Omer. The Omer is a verbal daily counting of the 49 days between the first day of Passover and Shavuot. It's a biblical mitzvah. If you've been watching our musical Havdalahs, for example, on Saturday nights, you'll notice that Rabbi Phil will, before reciting Havdalah, recite a blessing and count the Omer, which we do every night. This is something that a lot of Jews are doing right now. Originally, this period marks the time between the giving of two different offerings at the temple. So these are biblical offerings that were given for the harvest season. There was the wave offering, a sheaf of grain, usually barley, and this marked the beginning of the grain harvest in Israel. And 7 weeks later, there was the first fruits offering, the Bikurim, which marks the end of the grain harvest and celebrates all the new fruits and grains and breads and produce of the land that had been harvested. It's a time of massive growth and blooming. But we don't do those offerings today because we don't have a temple. So for us in the modern world, it really, when we're talking about the Omer, we're really talking about this period between Pesach and Shavuot. These 49 days of transition from slavery to redemption. So there are several reasons why I find the Omer so relevant right now to our situation, and I think that you'll see what I mean. So first of all, the simple act of counting the days, of keeping track of where we are, of how many days we've gone through, how many days we have left, is something I've actually noticed a lot of people doing over the past few weeks, and I'm sure a lot of people have, a lot of you have, or maybe you've even done it, especially on social media. A lot of people are posting day 2 of quarantine, day 10 of quarantine, day 20 of quarantine, and this can be either funny or depressing, depending on your outlook. Some people use it as like a way to follow a progression, or I guess in some cases, possibly a regression of like behaviors and changes and habits in everyday life. And that can again go on different kinds of trajectories, which I think, you know, a lot of us are probably struggling right now with these trajectories. But the idea itself of counting days and tracking time, which is something that we don't normally do, definitely seems to me to reflect the current reality of the Omer. Because usually we just live life. We're not really thinking about what day it is or how many days of this or how many days of that. We're trying, most of us, to live in the moment, and because the Omer and because of quarantine and coronavirus are both kind of forcing us to really take a deep look at where we are in time, I think that that connection is kind of undeniable. The second reason why I think the Omer is so relevant, and this is kind of the main reason in my mind, is because it's a time of semi-mourning. And within this reason, there are a few other reasons. So where does this mourning coming from? Why are we mourning? Because of a plague, actually. A plague that killed 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students about 2,000 years ago. Okay, so this plague was not coronavirus, obviously, but it was actually a divine punishment from Hashem because the Torah scholars were not treating each other with proper respect. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but had to mention the plague connection. But I really find it poignant that the Omer and Iyar, this period of time, is associated with loss and death. Because as we know, very tragically, thousands of people have died and are dying across the globe in almost every country from coronavirus right now. You know, we're all reading the news, we're seeing the reality. It's incredibly difficult for everyone affected. And while God willing, I pray that none of us here will be personally affected by the loss of a close loved one. You know, it does feel like a kind of darkness has fallen over everyday life and a lot of our interactions. And I think this speaks to our current state of mind. So while we may not be in literal mourning, again, you know, God willing, I think we can all agree that whether or not you know someone with coronavirus or somebody who has died from it, God forbid, the overall effect of this global pandemic, of these stay-at-home orders, of kind of like the entire, like, changing, drastically, unexpectedly changing of our entire way of life, like almost overnight, is something that's like very close to mourning. I think that we're all in like a mini state of mourning for how we thought the world was going to be right now. And we could be mourning things that, you know, maybe we feel like aren't as significant as a death, but they're still significant to us. Like we could be mourning the loss of a job or income, but we could be mourning the loss of just family togetherness, of socializing with friends, the fact that you will be able to travel or gather at shul, or kind of like do all of the things that you took for granted a few months ago. I know that I personally am definitely struggling with the fact that I probably won't be able to see my family in a few months to go back to visit as I wanted to. And I think we're all kind of probably dealing with some kind of loss of just our way of life. And the truth is we don't really know what the future holds, which is scary. We don't know what the world is going to look like after this. So like, while thank God we can be very grateful and feel very blessed that we're not personally sick or personally touched by death at this time, I think it's really natural and appropriate for all of us to feel this sense of mourning for life as it was or as we thought it was going to be. So it's not full mourning, it's semi-mourning, which is the Omer. Another reason why the Omer is actually, this one's a little bit funny, is relevant is because there are a lot of things we're not really supposed to do during the Omer because it's this time of mourning. And most of them we can't do now anyway because of self-isolation. So it may actually be the first time in history that Jews aren't the only ones observing the Omer. Including in this list of forbidden things is haircuts, listening to live music, going to concerts, having weddings or going to weddings, going to parties with dancing. You know, these are all things that we're not doing. So not only is this emotional period of semi-mourning really affecting our states of mind right now, the quarantine is actually reinforcing a lot of the Omer restrictions at the moment, which is almost funny, almost. But we're not going to end on a down note. We're going to wrap up in a minute, but I want to end on a good note and leave you with a positive message. The story of Rabbi Akiva does have a positive ending. The plague that afflicted his students ended on Lag BaOmer, which is the 18th day of Iyar. And usually we celebrate this with bonfires and parties. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen this year, but tradition teaches us that this plague among the Torah scholars was sent because they were speaking Lashon Hara, which literally translates as bad speech. In other words, they were gossiping about each other. They weren't acting as Torah scholars should act. They weren't acting with piety and with respect for each other. So once they stopped this behavior, the plague ended and students stopped dying. It didn't leave Rabbi Akiva with a lot of students, but the students that he had were some of the most brilliant Torah scholars in history. I do not believe that coronavirus is a divine plague, but what this does come to teach us is that we each have an individual power to stop and control this disease. Let me explain a little bit more about that. In the case of Rabbi Akiva's students, that power was spiritual in nature. They had to better themselves. They had to improve the way they treated each other. They had to work on their flaws and had to show Hashem that they could do better. We have a very different power, but it's not completely different. We should all, of course, strive to treat each other, treat ourselves with kindness, in active ways, with positive speech and positivity. Right now, we are being empowered to be kind passively by respecting these guidelines that are in place to stop the spread of the virus, which can be really, really hard. It might even be as hard as stopping ourselves from gossiping, because we all want to be together. That's our natural state, right? We want to go outside. We want to meet our friends. We want to see our families, our parents, our children, our grandchildren. We want to gather together. We want to celebrate happy occasions. We want to gather together to commemorate sad occasions. I'm sure all of us in the past weeks have thought about breaking our isolation for just one person or just one day, and maybe some of us have done that, no judgment. But at the end of the day, the fact that we are here together virtually right now on Zoom, even though we'd all rather be together in person, is actually, I think, an expression of each of us owning our power to help stop this virus, to be the person who says, I'm going to make decisions that will help myself, help my family, help my friends, help the world. I'm not going to be somebody who will help the spread of this virus. I'm going to use my power for good. And held within that power, I think, comes the power of Iyar, the power of healing. So the month of Iyar is actually called Ziv in Tanakh, in the book of Kings, which means budding or radiance. And that's because Iyar comes in the spring in Israel when the buds are starting to bloom and sustenance comes forth from the earth. It's a time of mourning. It's a time of transition. It is a period when it can feel like time is standing still. It's a time of waiting, right? We're waiting for things to get better. We're waiting for the grain to grow. We're waiting for redemption. But ultimately, I think in this moment of waiting and in this kind of very long moment of being still, of being home, we're actually quite literally healing the world. And we are enabling it to return to radiance, through very slow growth, through painful growth, but that's what we're doing. That's what we're all doing. When we're home, when we're sitting home, when we're respecting these difficult guidelines, we are allowing the world to heal. And I think these are some really interesting, at least to me, I find very interesting and really beautiful ways to think about the ideas of themes of the Jewish year and how those themes are in conversation with what's actually happening in our lives right now. Every year is obviously different, but I think this year the themes of Iyar are so clearly present in our everyday world. And I'm really happy to be able to share that with you. And that's pretty much my thing. And now we're going to open up the discussion, which Lauren is going to moderate. I'm going to invite all of you to contribute if you feel comfortable. If you'd like to share with us, I invite you all to do so. You don't have to, but I invite you all to do so. My question for you is, I'd love to know if any of the themes that we've discussed so far that I find so relevant resonate with you personally during this time. And if so, how? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about your personal experience with it. So as a reminder, the main themes that we've touched upon are healing, mourning, thinking, reflecting, and counting. So if you'd like to share with us how you're currently engaging with one of these ideas, now is the time to speak up. I ask that you keep it to about 1 minute just so that everyone who gets a chance to talk can do so.